I'm excited about today. It's wonderful in the midst of so much difficulty in our world to stop and have some playful, lighthearted, albeit historic information offered by someone who's got a really checkered past. And I want to tell you about one of the most interesting people I know, Nat Reed. He was a cab driver in Chicago, a casino worker in Nevada, a cartoonist, an advertising copywriter. He was cast in a rock and roll movie in the 50s. He appeared as a super in the New York Metropolitan Opera. He retired from the Navy as a chaplain. He was an LAPD reserve street cop working gang suppression in South Los Angeles and Vice in Hollywood. He appeared as a stand-up comic in the Comedy Store, Improv, and the Ice House, and one of fewer than 100 people in history to stand at both the North and the South Poles. He more recently was a public relations consultant with Reed Communications, former board chair of Pasadena Chamber of Commerce, author of 5 books, a playwright, and in his early days, he was a pre-ministerial studies student at Austin College in Sherman, Texas, preached from pulpits in small churches, but decided that that was not his call. And along the way, he marched with Dr. King. So we are so thrilled to have somebody who's really done his homework on how American Christmas was formed by a bunch of Episcopalians around General Seminary in Chelsea Square. Will you please warmly welcome Nat Reed.
Pity poor Santa Claus. Christians reject him because he's a secular intrusion into their most sacred of holidays. Jews reject him because he's associated with the Christian holiday. Mormons don't like him because he refuses to have children. North Korea and Cuba don't like him because he's the very icon of capitalism. The FAA doesn't like him because he violates our airspace. The IRS doesn't like him because he doesn't account for the distribution of his goods. The INS doesn't like him because he comes across our borders illegally. Law enforcement doesn't like him because he glorifies breaking and entering. Republicans don't like him because he promises everything with no plan at all for how to pay for it all. Democrats don't like him because he does good without raising taxes. Environmentalists don't like him because he despoils the pristine polar ice cap. The American Cancer Society doesn't like him because he glorifies smoking. The National Institute for Health doesn't like him because he is unapologetically porcine. Vegans don't like him because he wears leather. PETA doesn't like him because he wears fur. Pity poor Santa Claus. Well, if all those people don't like Santa Claus, who likes Santa Claus? Everybody likes Santa Claus. But nobody knows Santa Claus. Almost everything you think you know about Santa Claus is wrong. For example, you think of Santa Claus as a man, like the guy in the mall. Santa Claus was not a man. Throughout most of his history, Santa Claus was an elf, part of fairyland. That's why he could come down the chimney and fill stockings over the mantle. He didn't bring anything to put under the tree. Elves can do that, and you should have known that. Shame on you because you have heard this poem 1,000 times. And 1,000 times you missed all of the clues that were right there before your eyes and ears all of your life. It was the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap when out on the lawn there arose such a clatter I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer and a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles as coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on, Dunder and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, dash away, all. Like dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky. So up to the housetop his coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. Then in the twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each hoof. As I pulled in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all covered with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back. He looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and his beard of his chin was as white as the snow. Stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, smoke had encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and stout, a right jolly old And I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a nod of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He said not a word, but went straight to his work, filled all the stockings, turned with a jerk, giving a nod, laying a finger aside of his nose and giving a nod. Up the chimney he rose, sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." Santa Claus was an elf up into the lifetime of people in this room, into the early 1930s. So who slipped Santa Claus the growth hormone? His name was Edgar James, and he owned a department store in Brockton, Massachusetts, and in December of 1890, he put out the word that he was going to dress as Santa Claus and would speak to their children if they would patronize his store. Other department stores immediately saw the genius of this promotional gambit, and they began to hire men to dress as Santa Claus as well. And in 2 generations, from 1890 to the early 1930s, the historic concept of Santa Claus as an elf morphed into the full-grown man. You thought that Santa Claus evolved from a prehistoric winter solstice Nordic folkloric character in Northern Europe who stowed away on the Mayflower and came to this country with the earliest of the European settlers, and uninvited attached himself as a pagan secular parasite to the most holy day of the Christians in America. And none of that is true. Everything I just said is wrong. In fact, everything I said is just the opposite. Santa Claus didn't evolve. Santa Claus was invented out of whole cloth. It was invented in America and exported to Europe as a piece of American culture along with blue jeans, rock and roll, and cowboy movies. Christmas was not the major Christian day in the colonies. It was hardly even celebrated. Easter was the major holiday of Christians in colonial times. Devout Christians would go to church on Sunday, on Christmas, in the way that devout Christians today might go to Maundy Thursday services or Good Friday services. But if they went to a Christmas service, they went right back to work. Christmas was not a secular holiday. It wouldn't be a national holiday until after the Civil War, 1870, and then a federal holiday only in the district, at first, only in the District of Columbia, not in the states. Santa Claus was invented by 4 men in relatively recent times, in the 1880s, out of whole cloth. 4 Episcopalians in New York. The first of these Episcopalians was John Pintard. He was a merchant and civic leader and a believer in celebrations. He's the person largely responsible for making national celebrations out of Washington's birthday, Columbus Day, and the 4th of July. And John Pintard railed against the annual occurrence of a rampage by the working class. Every year, same time, midwinter, working class people who had no jobs in the agricultural fields, who'd been cooped up at home, went on rampages. And they went in mobs to the homes of wealthy people and took what they wanted. And they gathered in the public squares and engaged in all forms of public sexual debauchery. And John Pintard railed against this and wanted to establish a celebration for the upper class of New York, read Episcopalians. The upper class of New York at that time was Episcopalian. So he wanted to invent a celebration for the upper class in the midwinter that would be an antidote to these disgraceful behavior of the working class. So his idea was to designate a patron saint of New York City. Now, New York City was a Protestant city. Protestants don't have patron saints. So this was the capture of a religious figure for a secular, as just a device for a secular celebration. So he looked through his saint calendar. Could have been St. Gregory, St. Paul, St. Peter. Could have been St. anyone. But the saint whose day fell in this rampage period was St. Nicholas. So St. Nicholas was his guy. So he studied up a little bit on this midwinter saint, and he found that he was the patron saint of thieves. Can't do anything with that. He was the patron saint of prostitutes. Well, New York had too many of those. He was the patron saint of virgins. Well, New York had too few of those. Patron saint of children. Aha, I can do something with that. So he would have St. Nicholas would come on the eve of his saint day, the night of December 5th, and he would sit in stern judgment, this imperial bishop, on the children's behavior, and he would decide for the quaking children whether they would get switches in their stockings or candy. John Pintard did not invent Santa Claus. John Pintard did not invent Christmas. But John Pintard was the John the Baptist. The second Episcopalian was the author Washington Irving. He took his friend John Pintard's new patron saint idea, and he wrote a book to give him a backstory. The book was a history of New York by Diedrich Knickerbocker, an assumed name. And it is from that book and that name that we get the word for upper class New York today. The Knickerbockers comes from Diedrich Knickerbocker's History of New York. And in this History of New York, he invents, the backstory for St. Nicholas. He came from Holland, because this was New Amsterdam. He came from Holland on a Dutch ship called Goedenau. He came to New York and sat on a hill, smoked his pipe, and the clouds formed. The smoke from the pipe cast a shadow on Manhattan Island. And he said, "Where the shadow is of my smoke, there you will build your city." And then St. Nicholas came back, and he rode over the city in a wagon pulled by a horse, and he dropped pieces of candy down the chimneys. A bombardier. And then later he came back. Then he came back and he went down the chimney in person. And it was Washington Irving also who gave St. Nicholas an AKA, called him Santa Claus, anglicized version of Sinterklaas, the Dutch figure that is no way like Santa Claus. He just borrowed the name. Sinterklaas comes from Spain on a ship with a black slave who plays terrible tricks, mean tricks, very mean to children. It's nothing, not our Santa Claus. Washington Irving did not invent Santa Claus. Washington Irving did not invent the American Christmas. But had Washington Irving not been born, December 25th in America would be just another working day. The third of the Episcopalians, and by far the most important, was Clement Clark Moore, the son of the Episcopal Bishop of New York, a wealthy man who owned Chelsea, gave land from his estate for the formation of General Theological Seminary, an Episcopal seminary that still exists in New York to this day. Clement Clark Moore wrote the poem that I recited earlier. And that poem is not just a quaint, enchanting little poem about how Christmas is celebrated in America. That is a poem that invented how Christmas is celebrated in America. The importance of that poem cannot be over-exaggerated. Monumentally important for a number of reasons. Number one, he changed the wagon into a sleigh, changed the horse into reindeer, thought of the number of reindeer it would take to pull the sleigh, 8, gave them names. He changed the bishop from a member of the upper class, this stern imperial with all of his fine robes, into a working class dude, non-threatening, that everybody could relate to. His clothes were all covered with ashes and soot. He changed him from the judgmental bishop who decided whether children would get switches or candy, into a figure of unconditional love. Everybody gets presents from Santa Claus. He changed him from a religious figure, this Catholic figure from the 3rd century, Bishop of Myra, into a secular figure, but then he did something else. He took the birth of Jesus, which meant so much to this religious man who had made possible the seminary and then served on its faculty on its staff as faculty. He took the birth of Jesus and he attached it to Santa Claus, to St. Nicholas, to give the birth of Jesus more importance. Attached it to this holiday in New York. And then he changed the coming of this figure from the saint day of December 6th, he moved it to the day of the birth of Jesus to give that day more prominence with Christians. So what did St. Nicholas look like? When I was reciting that poem, you thought, I know you did, of a guy in a red suit with white fur trim and a broad black belt and black boots and a stocking cap with a fur ball at the end. None of that's in the poem. That's not how he saw him. That's not how artists saw the character in this poem. There's a couple of artist renditions of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." This is the character that came down the chimney, left the gifts. Now, how did Clement Moore himself see Santa Claus? There was a book published of the poem "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." Clement Moore approved the illustration for St. Nicholas. That's Clement Moore's "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." So the fourth of the Episcopalians was our graphics guy. And he gave a look to the character that was described in the poem by Clement Moore. This was Thomas Nast, the most popular cartoonist of his time. All elves. We're dealing with elves here. Between 1860 and 1890, he drew so many characterizations of Santa Claus that in 1890 he published a book with all of these Santa Clauses that he had done over the years. Here he is on the right, looking from the North Pole. He is the one that gave Santa Claus a home at the North Pole. So this is the Thomas Nast Santa Claus that we are so familiar with. While I'm debunking myths about Christmas, let me tackle a couple of others. The people in the big barn churches, those fellow Christians, rail at Xmas. Xmas, who is X? It could be said that Xmas is the most religious way, or a more religious way, to express Christmas. Over the years, Christian scholars, going back to the 1500s, Christian scholars who would work all day and all night writing about two entities, God and Christ, used the shorthand of the first Greek letter in their names. So, as they would write, theta for theos, God, and chi, or chi, for Christos. So, Xmas is the taking of that religious shorthand and as a designation for Christmas. Another one, you've heard this one, I know you have. Christmas comes earlier every year. The department stores are decorating earlier and earlier every year. The catalogs are coming earlier and earlier every year. I was a public relations executive for Sears Roebuck, and every year I would have to answer that question. Every year I would tell them how in 1946, as a kid, I remember going into a Woolworth store, and my mother said, "My goodness, they're already decorating for Christmas. It's not even Halloween. They used to wait till Thanksgiving." So how much earlier is it than October as it was in 1946? The letter, "Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus," was published in September. Is it Christmas coming earlier than September? Sears Roebuck published the Christmas Wish Book every year beginning in 1932, and that was released every year in August. From 1932, is it coming in here? No. This is not a myth, but let me just, it was this really fascinating piece of association of the religion with Santa Claus. You realize Santa Claus comes from the air and the Easter bunny comes out of a hole. Kind of interesting. You know, the reindeer of Santa all have antlers. Reindeer happen to be the only species of deer in which both male and female have antlers. But in the midwinter period, the males lose their antlers. So all of these reindeer with male names have an ambivalence, a contradiction. These are reindeer that would feel perfectly at home at All Saints, Pasadena. (1897), there was a coroner's assistant in New York, man who picked up dead bodies, dealt with death, and he gave life to Christmas that exists to this day. His daughter asked him if there was a Santa Claus. And Philip O'Hanlon didn't answer her directly. The O'Hanlon family had a trusted news source. You know how conservatives watch Fox News as the objective news source? And liberals watch MSNBC as their neutral, accepted news source? Well, the O'Hanlon family had the New York Sun. So Mr. O'Hanlon suggested to his daughter, ask the trusted news source. They'll give you the straight word. Dear editor, I am 8 years old. My little friends tell me there is no Santa Claus. Papa says if it's in the sun, it's so. Tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Virginia O'Hanlon, 115 West 95th Street. The newspaper, appropriately based on our conversation this morning, gave it to the religion editor to answer. A man who, appropriately enough, was named Church. Francis Pharcellus Church. And Frank Church answered that letter, and it was published in a very obscure part of the New York Sun on September the 19th, 1897, under an article about the invention of a chainless bicycle. Obscure as the placement was, people found it, they read it, they clipped it, they pasted it on their walls, they put it in their scrapbooks, they shared it with friends, and over time, that article became the most widely reprinted editorial in the history of the English language. Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except they see. They think that nothing can be comprehensible, nothing can be real that is not comprehensible to their little minds. All minds, Virginia, are little, whether they are men's or children's. In this great universe of ours, man is a mere insect, an ant in intellect when compared to the boundless world about him, when measured by the intelligence capable of grasping the whole of truth and beauty. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as surely as love, generosity, and devotion exist, and you know how these abound and bring your life to its highest level of beauty and joy. Alas, what a dreary world this would be if there were no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable our existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The eternal lamp with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not believe in Santa Claus? You might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch all of the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus. But what if they did not see Santa Claus coming down? What would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign there is no Santa Claus. Have you ever seen fairies playing on the lawn? Of course not. But that is no proof they are not there. The most real things in the world are things that neither men nor children can see. You may take apart the baby's rattle to see what makes the noise inside. But a veil covers the unseen world that not the strongest man, nor even the collective strength of all the strongest men who ever lived, can tear apart. Only faith, fancy, love, romance can push aside the curtain and view and picture the supernal beauty that lies beyond. Is it all real? Ah, Virginia, there is nothing in this world that is more real. No Santa Claus. Thank God he lives and will live forever, 1,000 years from now. Nay, Virginia, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood.
So we have these wonderful king ladies to take questions for us.
We have elves. We have our own elves.
We have elves. Here's a question. Here's a question.
Tell us the history of ho, ho, ho.
Ho, ho, ho. Ho, ho, ho comes from English folklore. It goes back to maybe the 17th century, and it was a story, there was a myth, folklore about a particular elf. And this elf said, ho, ho, ho. So it's like, you know, if you hear in the anteroom, you hear somebody saying, cheerio, old chap. You know, that guy's from England. You know, but so if somebody said ho, 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 that's a fairy. Only fairies say ho, ho, ho. So Santa was an elf, and that's what elves say, is ho, ho, ho. Next question. Yes, sir.
Was the first Santa Claus a Democrat or a Republican?
You know, I was trying to think of the name of that columnist, that prolific columnist of Rolling Stone, the libertarian guy. I can't think of his name, but he says, God is a Republican, Santa Claus is a Democrat. So we'll leave it at that.
Here, they're coming to you, Jay. Back in the back, we'll go ahead and get the mic to you right now. Okay.
What about the Coca-Cola Santa? I thought he was supposed to be part of the image.
Oh, the Coca-Cola Santa. I promise you, no. We do not go way back. We did not. The Coca-Cola Company says that they were the ones who invented the look of Santa Claus. It was invented, they say, by Haddon Sundblom, one of the great illustrators of his age, along with Norman Rockwell. Haddon Sundblom was an illustrator famous for his cheesecake, his barely clothed female bodies. And Coca-Cola hired him to do Christmas calendars with Santa Claus drinking Coke, and so they did this. This is part of why Santa Claus is so omnipresent now around the world. He flies around the world on Christmas Eve, but he flies on an American passport. And Haddon Sundblom drew these, and so Coca-Cola said, this is who invented the look of Santa Claus, and they trademarked it. They trademarked it. Now you, intellectual property attorney, tell me how you can trademark Santa Claus. So that was 1932, right? They invented, Haddon Sundblom invented the look of Santa. 1896, there's our guy. 1925, 7 years before Haddon Sundblom. Looks like our guy to me. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Yes, sir.
Where did the sees you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake and the whole naughty nice list come from?
Oh, that's from well, it is from the myth of Saint Nicholas, perpetuated through John Pintard in his deciding whether they would get switches or candy. Saint Nicholas, by the way, is no longer a saint. In the Catholic calendar, in 1969, the Pope took his saint day away from him. He said, "We don't know. These stories are not true. There's no original verification of these stories. These are stories that were made up years and years later." And so, in theological terms, Saint Nicholas was circumsainted. Other questions?
Thank you for a wonderful talk. Where I come from, Santa Claus was called Father Christmas.
Yes.
Can you explain?
Yes. Okay. Yes, I can explain. There is one Santa Claus, basically, in the whole world, and he looks like our guy, and he's our Santa Claus. Everywhere in the world, he's called Santa Claus. He looks like Santa Claus, but cultures such as Great Britain and Père Noël in France and Dead Moroz in Russia and even Sinterklaas in Holland, they've all become Santa Claus. And what they've done is gone back to their pre-Santa Claus figures and used that name for the American Santa Claus. Father Christmas didn't come to give gifts to children. Father Christmas came to drinking halls and mixed with people with Christmas cheer there. Nothing about children, nothing about gifts. Look at Charles Dickens, look at your Christmas Carol. Nothing about no Christmas trees, there's no giving gifts to each other, all of that. But retroactively, all of these European cultures have given to our Santa Claus their old name. Yes. Yes.
I have a 5-year-old granddaughter, Nora, and she's not interested in Santa Claus.
Okay.
She wants to know what is Mrs. Santa Claus doing. And she writes letters to her. How come we haven't developed an other partner or something for Santa Claus?
Mrs. Claus is a very unformed character. She is portly, and she's Mrs. Claus, and that's about all we know about her. Again and again in literature, she has come up as the wife of Santa Claus. She first comes up in 1853 in a story of the legend of Christmas by a guy named Reese. And then she's mentioned in the Yale Literary Review a decade later or so. And then so you can trace all these mentions of Mrs. Claus. And then in the 1960s, Phyllis McGinley wrote How Mrs. Claus Saved Christmas. And that was made into a movie and books, and so she became a much more identified figure then. So she's there, she bakes cookies, She helps with the toys in some sort of undefined way, and that's Mrs. Claus. Yes.
Well, I listened to this with a Dutch here because I was born in Holland. So
Okay.
I heard you say that the Dutch invented Santa Claus. And also, in Holland, we still practice Sinterklaas. He comes on December 5. And the Dutch take Christmas pretty seriously because they have 2 days of Christmas. But it doesn't have the materialistic elements. It's more of a spiritual take on it. And has nothing to do with gift giving or NBA basketball.
Yeah.
You know, it's Christmas.
Okay, good. So back me up. Sinterklaas is not our Santa Claus figure, right? He's got a different...
I say Sinterklaas, we practice the original from New Amsterdam, New Netherlands.
Yeah.
Sinterklaas comes on December 5. The kids put their shoes out, they would hay for the horses and and then Santa comes to the chimney just like the American Santa, but when the gift giving is done, then that's it. I mean, that's it for gift giving. Christmas is not for Santa Claus. It's for your own self-improvement. Are you getting better as a person? Are you rearranging your mental blocks all year long, or are you getting closer to the light? Are you a civil person? Can you be more civil next year? You know, you examine your conscience, and then you know.
So that's a characteristic that the inventors of Santa Claus plucked, perhaps from Holland. They plucked something else from Dead Morose. They picked something else from here and there. But Santa Claus did not evolve from any of those characters. Santa Claus, well, our English language is Germanic. It was Anglo-Saxon, a Germanic language, and over the years it acquired borrowed words. It borrowed words from French, from Latin, from Arabic, from lots of different places. That does not mean that English descended from Arabic or Latin or French. It is a Germanic language which simply borrowed. And Santa Claus borrowed maybe the gift giving there, it borrowed the costume, the northern costume. You know, St. Nicholas, the Bishop of Myra, that's a Mediterranean country. This is a warm weather guy in Bermuda shorts. You know, how did he get, how does St. Nicholas infer? Well, because he was the patron saint of Russia, and so St. Nicholas was dressed as the weather was there. So we borrow that costume from Russia and from Northern Europe, and we borrow something, and we borrow Christmas trees from Germany and borrow Christmas cards from England, but this is our invention. We simply borrowed from here and there.
That's it. Thank you